The Oliver Stone Podcast, episode 13. You like that?
Let's do it.
Did you like that?
I did.
All right,
Very
Alex.
official.
Yeah, it's official now. We're live.
Indeed.
Well, Alex, thank you for coming to do the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I guess we can say the first time we did it, it was unsuccessful because the camera turned off.
Shit happens.
Yeah, it happens. But we're back, and we're gonna do it again. It's gonna be fantastic. So
Hopefully you don't walk away with the assessment that I'm crazy, because I give a whole different story about my life and where
Yeah,
I'm at.
which
so
is interesting. So
this
yeah.
will be good for me to kind of be consistent with the narrative.
Oh yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. So let's start off with who you are and what you do for a living.
Well, again, thank you for having me. My name is Alex Van Mecl. I am a senior public relations practitioner / senior project manager type. Originally born and raised in Fort Myers, Florida, over on the west coast of Florida. It's about 2 hours away from Miami for those that aren't geographically inclined. And that's where I grew up. That's the genesis of my story and kind of what inspired so many things that I'm working on today and what I later pursued after college.
Okay. On the West Coast, where'd you say it was again?
Fort Myers.
Fort Myers,
So
right?
Again, it's just south of Sarasota, north of Naples, Bonita Springs. Tragically, it's where Hurricane Ian did the most damage, for those that remember that a little more recently.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it kind of obliterated Fort Myers Beach and Sanibel, but I'm proud of my community and where I'm from. You know, it's got a quaint town feel with a lot of growth and progression, and interestingly enough, a lot of craft-like experiences, from breweries popping up to pizza shops. It's
Like
not
now.
Yeah, it's not the
Okay.
Fort Myers I grew up with. So the fact that it's come so far in the few years that I've been away, it's kind of exciting.
Yeah, that's great. What school did you go when you were over there? Did you graduate high school there, or did you move around?
I did. So I hopped around. Well, I went. That makes me sound like a nomad. I went from one charter school, not a fan, to public school. I was a fan, and the last school I went to was Riverdale High School. Yeah.
Nice. Like the show.
Like the show.
Wow.
And in fact, interestingly enough, one of the things that I was, fascinated by that had happened in part at Riverdale was what's called the Lords of Chaos. It was a teen militia group, like pre-Columbine, pre any bombing of public significance. There was a teen militia group based out of Riverdale High School, the one that I went to in Fort Myers, that was known and notorious and actually infamous, in fact, for all the things they were doing around Fort Myers, causing arson and ultimately resulting in them killing somebody that worked at the high school. So that's
Wow.
a story that not a lot of people have heard about in quite some time. It's not a good thing for the
first time I'm
reputation
hearing it.
of the community, but it's definitely, I mean, Dateline NBC did a whole segment on it some time ago, but that's the high school that I went to. It's
Wow.
not the one that I was at during those times. It's an international baccalaureate program school,
Gotcha.
or was. I haven't been back. So,
Gotcha.
yeah, that's my humble beginning.
And you stayed in college in Florida, or did you go somewhere else for college?
I did. So I just wanted to get away from my hometown. I wanted to kind of spread my wings, but I didn't want to go too far. So the first school I looked at was FIU, Go Panthers. But I didn't go there, just to be clear.
So go Panthers. You
Go
didn't even there?
Panthers, but, go, no go. But I actually didn't end up going there. I went to FAU, Florida Atlantic University, out of Boca Raton.
Yeah.
Go Owls. That's
Go
where
Owls
I graduated from 4 years in, 2008 to 12. And thereafter, I got my degree in film and media. I worked in the film industry here in Miami. I went to and worked at the Miami International Film Festival. I was an extra. I did some stunt work when they were
Bro, you
filming a
can't
lot.
skip all these things, man. Like, you're saying some interesting
no,
stuff
no.
here, bro.
This is
Stuntman?
just-
You were a stuntman?
This is just like the padding for the larger package to come to be unveiled. But yeah, interestingly enough, the one time I served as a stunt guy was on the show The Finder which was a Fox or FX, no, I think it was Fox show with Jeff Stoltz and Michael Clark Duncan, who had passed away
Yeah, R.I.P.
not long after I had actually met him in the trailer while I was being made up to look like one of the day players that they had that day.
Okay.
So, or previous to me serving as a stunt guy. So it was interesting. I mean, it wasn't crazy. I didn't like do a flip or anything, but I
Can
did
you?
drive. I did drive. No, I cannot. I did drive a car across the MacArthur Causeway a couple times, like back and forth with a helicopter going over me, and then there were a few other pickup shots that I
Nice. Look
served.
at you. Next
Yeah.
stop, Miami Vice, baby.
Yeah, I mean, shout out to Jeff Stoltz, who said I looked better. I was more attractive than the day player they had. So, as shy and nerve wracking as that was to be next to, a working actor telling me I looked better than the guy that got hired, it
Wow.
was flattering. But that was the beginning to, uh, I don't want to say a lengthy pursuit in entertainment. It didn't last too long once I went out to Hollywood, California, not Florida. But it was a great introduction to the industry.
Hmm.
It was in the beautiful backyard of Miami-Dade County. And it wasn't just that. I was in Step Up 3,
As a
Burn
dancer?
Notice. No, not as a dancer. As an onlooker to the dancers that were doing the backflips.
Okay.
So Ocean Drive has a special place in my heart because I've seen it transform twice. For the opening segment, it was like a 3-day shoot for 5 minutes in the film, which was a huge like opening dance routine where they were like tagging cars and doing all these backflips from the tops of the deco boutique hotels. And then the other show that made that whole strip have a whole transformation was I think it was called Magic City, and it was on Stars, and it was about the gangster era. So they had quite literally transformed Ocean Drive to like the 40s and 50s
I
with the
love
period
period
cars.
pieces.
They
Nice.
covered all the signs that were like present day. They had like chessboard players in Lummis Park. That further cemented my passion and love
Hmm.
for entertainment, let alone filmmaking and that kind of creative space.
Gotcha. So let's go back a bit. So you finished school for
Cheers,
film.
by the way.
Yeah, cheers.
Much needed.
Yeah. Oh man, there's nothing like a cold beer, bro.
Yeah, we won't say the brand because it's not sponsoring the segment, but
Oh, it could
it's
if
a
it
good
wanted
one.
to.
It's the only light beer I really like.
For real? That's the only one we had in the fridge.
There you go.
That's interesting.
Perfect.
So let's backtrack a bit to after school. How did you get into the field? Does the school kind of hook you up with getting jobs inside the production industry, or is that something you have to do? Is that something-
For anyone who's seeking an internship that's waiting for that moment, Godspeed. No, I pursued all of that myself.
Okay.
So it started with I worked as an intern for a film producer, and I like fought with my school to get credit for that opportunity. Come to think of it, I don't remember if I actually got it or not, but it was a legitimate internship with a legitimate film producer. He actually did a film that I did a cover sheet on when I used to read scripts for him. I was there for like one season, like from an August to November kind of situation. And that film was with Ava Mendez, and it was called, can't remember, but it was like a 13 going on 30 kind of coming of age story.
Mhm.
Anyways, I remember reading that script and being really moved by just how kind of edgy it was and emotional and contemporary. The film ended up being a version of that. It wasn't exactly what I read to the extent of me crying while reading it.
Really?
But it was
Damn.
still an interesting arc. Even though I had moved on from that internship, I vividly remember like really strongly recommending it for consideration. I
Mhm.
left, and then a few years later,
They make the movie.
they make the movie, and Ava Mendes is attached to it. So even just from like a producing perspective, that was kind of a neat, kind of sideline perspective of like how the industry works, even if I
Mhm.
wasn't immediately involved.
I
But
understand.
that's also why I started doing all the extra gigs. That's why I started working at the Miami Film Festival, because I was just desperate, eager, passionate to want to involve myself. So the school really didn't broker or facilitate that. In fact, I vividly remember being conflicted with the decision of, do I go to class to learn about film to the 1940s, which was the name of the class, and write a paper that's due by
sounds
set date?
amazing, though.
It was great. Or do I go work on an actual set for The Glades, which was an A&E crime show, where I could actually learn firsthand experience what it's like being on a set. So I made a choice. I ended up graduating with honors. I somehow figured it out, as college students do. But, you know, it was an interesting kind of parlaying and fight for, you know, finding that place and better understanding like what I wanted to do within the industry. And nothing on the production end was speaking to me, but I did love the atmosphere and the aura of creativity.
Yeah.
I ended up later doing publicity, which is its own animal on a different side of the coin of, you know, production. But, you know, it was a great foundation. Miami was a great place to start it. I wish they actually filmed as much today as they did back. This was like between 2009 and 12. They were filming so many things. Iron Man 3 filmed. I was in that movie too for a minute. So
For a minute.
for
Which
just a
minute was
minute.
that? Do you have
Literally,
the
like the
exact-
first minute of the film, they like set the stage of like Sweden, 1999, the millennium. You know, like, you know, this is when the internet was supposedly going to crash, electricity was
Yeah,
going to.
Y2K.
Yeah, Y2K. And so they were setting the stage for the opening of Iron Man 3 to take place in like Sweden at some like Y2K party. But it wasn't in Sweden, folks. It was in Miami Beach at some ballroom at a deco building. But it was great. You know, we had clearly some tax incentives to bring productions here. Charlie's Angels on ABC was filming at the same time, didn't take off. But that's kind of what I remember as being this moment in time for filmmaking.
And what caused you the transition to Hollywood, like the Hollywood? How did you get over there?
The real
the real where they
OG?
make the movies with the back rooms, you know?
You mean the one where they filmed Griselda as Miami?
Yeah.
Shout out to Griselda.
That looks
Not
dope,
the
though.
person, the show.
That looks good though.
It's great. It is maddening to see the backdrop of LA/Long Beach serving as Miami Beach, but they did that as far back as Dexter.
Even
after
Bad Boys, yeah.
Bad Boys too, but at least they did a lot filming here
Yeah.
versus this one that I can't recall if they did anything.
Dexter, for sure, you're right, was all filmed in Hollywood.
First season was filmed here,
Yeah.
and then they packed up, left, took all the
Because of a
elements.
hurricane or something, right? There was something
The
that
tax
Diamond just said.
incentive.
Taxes, right?
Goes back to taxes and the bottom line. So the question you had was going to Hollywood.
Yeah, how'd you get over there?
I had dreamed of going to Hollywood since a wee little thing. I can remember the days where I was really trying to figure out a way to detach myself from my own family and emancipate legally to not be owned by them and to be self-sufficient and go work in Hollywood. Didn't happen, folks. You need money for that. But needless to say, after college, you know, it took me almost a year to find my way out of South Florida, just trying to save money to make that transition. And then I ended up going in 2013. I worked in intellectual property licensing and merchandising for like a 2-year period. For those that know the movie The Endless Summer, it's like a classic. It is the classic epitome of surf documentary from 1964. I worked on that with Bruce Brown, the filmmaker, just basically establishing a merchandise program. Anytime you saw the Endless Summer iconic T-shirt at the Gap or Lucky Brand, I would be facilitating those arrangements. So that was kind of like my introduction to Los Angeles County. I was living in Torrance at that time for a brief period. And then fast forward, I started working at Universal Studios as a VIP studio guide, the famed Universal Studios backlot tour.
Damn, that's crazy. So you facilitated the tours?
I did the tours.
So you would drive people around, be like, this is where we shot Jaws, this is where we shot this.
I did not drive. I did not do the driving.
Okay.
We had our union as actors. I say that very loosely because I'm not. And then the drivers had their own.
So you don't have an IMDb, is
Teamsters
that what you're
union.
saying?
I do not.
If I look
I
your
don't
name up on
think so.
IMDb,
That's
I
a
won't
good
find
question.
you. I'm probably going to find
Just
you.
for
I'm gonna look it
OnlyFans.
up.
No, I'm kidding. This predates the recording. No, but it's a, it's a very thematicized, scripted, theme park-esque, but legit studio tour experience that takes people in a tram, 150 people in 4 carts, to be able to tour and see the backlot, see a real working TV and film set or film studio.
And there's like people working, movies are being made, shows are being
Yep.
made, and you're doing the tours live
Exactly.
while they're recording with the actors. So they might bump into an actor while they're there.
Yeah, that would happen. In fact, while I was working there near the end, they were filming the NBC show The Good Place with Kristen Bell and Ted Danson. And so when I became, after being there 2 years, and I became a VIP guide, and I would actually, instead of a tram, be in a trolley, and it'd be like a more exclusive audience. Brandy, the musician, was one of my guests. We would get out of the vehicle, walk the streets where they filmed Desperate Housewives, where they did Murder, She Wrote.
So the VIP tour guide does that. The regular tour guide is the tram driver.
They don't drive the trams.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so
to
they
be
don't drive.
clear,
How they get around?
No
It's
offense to
electric?
the actual drivers that are in a union and are proud to be Teamsters. No, we were on cameras with a microphone on those trams, basically doing the whole show. But needless to say, it was really cool to be able to deconstruct for the commoner, for the viewer at home, people visiting, kind of just more or less this is what it looks like. Like for those that knew Back to the Future from the 80s,
It's my favorite movie, bro.
we had the original courtyard, like the original New York style, but could be any city, streetscape where the clock tower is still today.
Oh, the clock tower is there still?
It's still there. It looks different than the movies because they always dress things
I mean, it was
up.
hit by lightning like 4 times.
Yeah, right. Good one. Well, actually, funny enough, you mentioned that because the majority of that New York downtown, like the backlots space, actually burned to the ground, except for the clock tower and the whole left side of that square where most of what you saw in Back to the Future was
When
filmed.
the
They did.
3D Jaws thing pops out. That whole set you're talking about is
Some of it was destroyed.
okay. I see what you mean.
But, I would go and break this down. And while I was there, they were doing Hairspray Live on NBC, which was cool because then they turned it into Baltimore, Maryland. Bruce Almighty filmed there. I mean,
You got to meet Jim Carrey?
No. This is like way before
Oh.
me.
Can't throw names.
I
at me.
wish.
All right. Did you get starstruck at all? Like, is there somebody you were like, damn, I can't believe this person is in front of me right now?
This kind of jumps ahead to my days working in publicity at HBO. I worked on Game of Thrones, Curb Your Enthusiasm. I worked with everyone. I've met so many people at award shows, on carpets that I worked for HBO, for the Emmys, the Golden Globes.
Get out of here.
I think the one that I'm not really starstruck necessarily because it's work for me. It's a job. I'm professional. There are some that I'm more inclined to want to follow up with or see how they're doing just because I genuinely liked them as people. And there isn't this unfounded prestige that some people in America think that Hollywood has riding on their shoulders. Like these people oftentimes came from nothing and became who they are today based on their talent or their ability to network within the industry. But the one person that I was just shocked that I was standing next to, 2 people, was Meryl Streep. I didn't work with her. I did kind of surround myself a little bit when she was on Big Little Lies, which was a show I didn't directly work on, but every publicist at HBO kind of helped each other out in different facets or venues. But I actually stood next to her at the Screen Actors Guild on a red carpet. And that, just that moment of like the screaming, the yelling, the flashes of the photographers going off.
And what are you doing there while you're there? What's your job on site?
Facilitating interviews for talent. So I would be assigned to talent from HBO that would be arriving at a specific time. And then we try to pre-set up or line up interviews with Entertainment Tonight.
Okay, so the interviews that we commonly see on the television with the specific actress or actor with the interviewee is done by somebody like you in the background? That's
It's
kind of organizing
facilitated,
that?
yeah.
Gotcha.
But, mind you, if I've got a BC actor from Game of Thrones, right? They're not maybe Emilia Clarke or what's his name? Not John. I can't remember his name.
But Jon Snow's character?
Yeah, him.
Yeah, I don't
I
remember.
can't remember his
He's
actor.
Jon Snow.
He's
That's
just
what he
Jon
should be
Snow.
known
Well,
as.
anyways, when they show up, they're the A-list talent of that show that interviewers and reporters know are coming and are excited to talk to, just to get some some scoop on like what's coming up the season. What did you like? Just the sound bites for the news waves.
Sure.
But sometimes we get actors that, they're known for being in the show. They're very famous, but when a reporter has an option between Emily Blunt standing next to your actor, they're going to prioritize her versus the person you have. It's a popularity contest. And they have to try to maximize the short time that they have with actors, which is like 2 minutes an interview. It's not very long, if that. So, so yeah, that's more or less what I did. Just when it comes to red carpets, on the backside, when it came to photo producing and IDing, press junkets, leaking photos to the press. That's what I did in that.
So you would leak photos? Like sometimes the leaked photos are leaked by the publicist?
Sometimes.
I knew it.
Yeah.
I knew it.
I feel like musicians are worse with this. Like Taylor Swift did this at the Grammys where she like plugged her own album coming out. But needless to say, I wouldn't use the term leaked as much as I would drop, because we always kind of pre-planned those photos to go out with Game of Thrones, because there was sensitivity to certain spoiler moments in an episode. When it would air on the East Coast, we would send out handful of photos that were kind of generic from the episode. Some people would run it that night. And then once it aired on the West Coast, all bets were off as to some of the spoilers getting out into the various streams like Twitter. And that's when we would send out another batch of photos that would show a little bit more revealing moments that might give it away as to like what happened. Like someone's death, for example.
So how did you get that gig when you got to LA? How did you get the gig as a
That's
publicist?
a great question. That was a segue from Universal to there. And the short answer to that was temping. I started temping.
What does that mean?
When you work with a temp agency and they kind of plug and place you in different industries or businesses based on the needs of that organization to hire temporary work, basically.
Gotcha.
So that's hence temp. But I told this temp company, staffing company, let's just put it that way, that I only wanted to work in entertainment, and their only client was HBO, interestingly enough.
Nice. What a great client, right?
Right, for them.
Best
so
in the business.
I had temped on and off for about a year in finance and production, and I wasn't really a fan, to be honest. Like, at least the people that I was working for in short stints, it could have been like a few hours on one day. Maybe I got called back to come, sit on the desk, answer the phones. And then I had a month-long stint in production, and I hated it. And it was mostly because of the person I was working for. And then I went back to Universal, and then I got a call saying an opportunity is opening up in the PR department. Would you be interested? And I'm like, not really, because I haven't had the best experience there. And they're like, well, I'm sorry to hear that, but I really think that you'd be a good fit for this department, simply because of the nature and the energy of the people that are working in it. And most important, the position is actually going to be posted because the person is leaving that you would be serving a temporary role for. So there's a possibility you could get hired. I was like, oh, actually, that doesn't sound half bad.
Okay.
And so from December, I think it was the day after my birthday, December 21st, for a few days. Then there was a break. Everyone kind of left for the holidays, come back in January. By end of January, I had a job offer with them, or early February of 2017. And that's kind of what started that journey.
And how long were you in LA for?
Almost 8 years as a whole. Almost 4 at HBO near the end. And then AT&T bought the company, Warner Brothers, HBO, Turner, and turned it upside down and eliminated a lot of positions. I was one of them. Okay. So then that's when I was already back in Florida because of the pandemic, helping family, met my now partner. And I was just relearning the Florida way. I vowed never to come back to Florida.
What's your
I
beef with Florida, bro?
say what?
What's your beef with Florida?
The beef was I grew up, I had great years in entertainment, but I wanted to be where the real magic was happening.
You wanted
Like
to stay in
all things
Hollywood.
considered, like all those productions I mentioned before came from the source, right?
Right.
And I always wanted to be there because that's where the industry is. That's where the fraternity is. And I really embraced that level of creativity and that aura, again, that I was lucky enough to be a part of. So coming back to Florida just seemed like a retrograde, like a little bit of a step back from where I wanted to immerse myself creatively. And so, my dad had passed away. So there were a few personal reasons why Florida just was not on my radar until it was. And then during the pandemic, I'm like, hey, it's actually kind of nice being back. Fort Myers has come a long way. Downtown looks different. There's all these cool places to eat. I used to give tours at Thomas Edison's historic home in Fort Myers. So just going back there and kind of reliving my childhood memories all over again, it was comforting, especially after the chaos of the riots in 2020, the pandemic, of course, which took
So you're in Fort Myers when that was happening.
nearest to the end. Yeah, I had come
Okay.
back in August of 2021. But the journey led me back full circle to Florida. Um, and that's where the new pursuits have begun and where my new track has kind of informed, taken all these different passions of mine, urban planning that I studied also in part in college, to film and television, and kind of merging those ideas into what I'm working on today.
Okay, and today is. How did you get to Opa-Locka?
Yeah, so
How do you
for
go from Fort Myers to Opa-Locka?
Well, there was a few steps in between. Miami Lakes was part of that journey. I lived there for 6 months
I grew
before.
up in Miami Lakes. My family had a house out there, so I grew up
Yeah.
in Haiti, but our vacation home that we had was in Miami Lakes in the
That's
Moors.
great. Yeah,
That was a nice little community.
we made a great friend who had a shop on Main Street there. So
Yeah, Main Street was dope.
yeah,
I loved it back in the day.
it's
yeah, with
cute.
the theater. Yeah, it's nice.
It's still there.
Yep.
Needless to say, I got a job after losing mine. I was living in Miami Lakes. And then out of nowhere, I thought, what would it be like to have a home? Because I remember like viciously scrolling through Zillow, like so many of us were during the pandemic, just imagining what it would be like to have more space out in the country, fresh air, a nice sized living room with a bedroom or two. And so I picked that back up, and this is the worst time to do it because of the economics of the housing market. But I was still compelled to try because I had met somebody that did mortgage lending, and he gave me a really compelling statement, which was, you actually have enough to buy something. And it wasn't much, mind you, but I worked on my credit for years. It was stellar. My savings was top notch, more or less. So I actually had something to do with that. And there's this idea of no better way to make an investment than in real estate. And I've always wanted that. Something historic was one of the pre-qualifications of what I was in search of. And in the midst of being in Miami Lakes, I started looking at listings. I was kind of starting to feel hopeless. I had seen a total of 7 properties. The 6th one was in a city called Opa-Locka here in Miami-Dade. For those that don't know, it's right next to Miami Lakes, just south of Miami Gardens. And once I saw this house, I couldn't believe how strong it was, for being 96 years old. I was really amazed that this thing was at the price that it was at, and that it looked as good as it was versus the things that I've been seeing in Miami and Broward counties. And within a 24-hour period, I looked up the history of the place. I was just completely fascinated that in the 1920s, there was a planned community being built that exists today in the form of Opa-Locka that was based on the Arabian Nights novel, this ancient text that has been repurposed, readapted, retranslated over and over again throughout the generations. That a whole city was designed in and around this theme, this motif. So then I was thinking about my film days, coming back to Florida. It's a beautifully designed city. And so I wrote like a 2-page letter to the owner of the house, and within 24 hours I was under contract. So
Nice.
then Opa-Locka 35, 40 days later became home in September of 2021.
Interesting. So you brushed over the history of Opa-Locka real quick, based in the
Yeah.
1920s with the Arabian Nights theme. So
Yeah.
this is what we met. When we met the first time, we met last year for summer for one of these Opa-Locka projects.
Yeah.
And I think they're trying to rebuild, kind of like still embrace the theme from the 1920s. But more or less, what's really interesting for me is Glenn Curtis and how he fits into this Opa-Locka Arabian Night story, not being actually from Florida. So if
Yeah.
you can please elaborate on who Glenn Curtis was and his involvement in Opa-Locka, because he was the one that brought that whole idea. Him and another gentleman, which normally I don't have my phone on when I have my podcast, but there's so much notes that I have about this guy.
Yeah.
With his architect Bernard Emil Muller.
Yeah.
So can you please kind of elaborate more or less who this person was and how did they get involved with Opa-Locka?
I'll try to be brief because there's, the Glenn Curtis story and his legacy is nothing short of just outstanding.
Yeah, it's crazy.
He is known as the father of naval aviation.
Mm-hmm.
His contributions to the U.S. military as well as aeronautics in general, really in advancing at a time when America was being very competitive about and aggressive to trying to advance.
Thank you.
Good timing.
Yeah.
At a time when America was really pushing the envelope to what their innovations could lead to. Edison was doing with the incandescent light bulb, the phonograph, the battery.
Yeah, that's what makes it so
It's
interesting.
just this
It's
time
that
and-
time,
yeah.
that time where like this tech was starting to come with Edison and the electricity, the light bulb, all this stuff was happening.
The
and
industrial age.
Yeah, the industrial age was happening, and it's just so fascinating. And then here comes this guy. I think he's originally from
New York.
New York,
Yeah.
and then he buys this. Was it him that bought the land, that bought the Opa-Locka land to build the project?
So a little bit cart before the horse, but Curtis and his notoriety came because of his time up in Hammondsport, New York. That's where he established the Glenn H. Curtis Manufacturing Company. He did motorcycles for those that like motorsports. He was the guy that kind of really put that on the map. He was billed the fastest man on earth because of a competition he did in Ormond Beach, Florida in 1907. I think he was clocked at 145 miles per hour, which is absurd, like 8 cylinders on a bicycle, aka motorcycle. Was unheard of. So he had already been very familiar with Florida early on in his career, and this was even before aeronautics. He got into aeronautics in large part thanks to Alexander Graham Bell, who helped to invent the telephone.
Yeah, he's the co-founder of AT&T, by the way.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, Bell Company. And so, needless to say, Curtis continued to, really refine his skill set in being a tinkerer and being an inventor, experimenter. And, I'm sure he no doubt had others helping him along the way, but he was adamantly and fiercely committed to the application of motors on existing cycle-like machinery, like a bicycle or the gliders that they had. So a lot of people, including myself, when you go into grade school and you learn about American history, especially as it relates to aviation, the first more or less 2 names that come up are Wilbur and Orville Wright, the Wright brothers, the first in flight. What most don't know is that Glenn Curtis was the first pre-announced flight in American history. He actually was able to take a glider of his design and bring it off the ground for any length of period over a lake, and that was done in New York. But it's defined as pre-announced because the Wright brothers were working toward the publicity machine that they were really clever with, like Edison was clever, with his empire. Tesla was not, even though he was brilliant. It's kind of like a similar dynamic. Glenn Curtis was the Tesla to the Edison kind of dynamic against the Wright brothers. And so
a movie on this would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, it would be.
Look at all the characters you already have in this movie. You have Edison, you have Bell, you have Curtis, you have all these forefathers of what we have today. That'd be
Right.
interesting.
It would be.
Is there anything on that? I'm saying it like there isn't any. There could be.
I think there was one. There's definitely one on Edison, and I'm pretty sure the Wright brothers. I don't know about Curtis. Like maybe
Yeah.
like a docu
Like
series
Curtis,
vignette.
yeah, exactly. Like a
something
whole
like
story
that.
based on Curtis and the Aerial Experiment Association. You
The
know,
AEA, yeah.
yeah.
And so that little group from Nova Scotia really helped to advance and pioneer the mechanics of this industry, and that's what Curtis also is brilliant with is, gears and wind calculations, things of that sort. Mind you, he had no more than an eighth grade education, so the fact that he created an empire and was later decorated as the father of naval aviation because of the designs of airplanes he was designing for the U.S. Navy. It's brilliant. So, needless to say, like many, he kind of sold off his wealth and did what most do, come down to Florida to retire. But he didn't really retire. He was fiercely committed to growing aviation in South Florida, starting in Miami Beach area, but then it went over into Hialeah. That later was established as one of his first developments, and also a company. So his 3 housing projects was Hialeah, Country Club Estates, Miami Springs, and his last one in South Florida was Opa-Locka.
A 4.2 acre property, right? Project that he had. He named the Opa-Locka.
What was 1,000 acres?
1,000 acres.
Yeah, all of Opa-Locka.
All of it.
So he partnered
Holy
with
moly.
a rancher named James Bright, who owned the land in large part, and I'm sure Curtis helped to acquire even more of it. And they went into business together with Curtis Bright Properties for Hialeah and Miami Springs. But Opa-Locka was different because Opa-Locka kind of started its genesis and its thematic evolution at the time that the Florida land bloom of the 1920s started to take a decline. So I'm sure Bright and others around him were like, Curtis, you crazy. Like, why would you start a new housing project when all indicators are showing that the market's actually going down? This is before the Great Depression, but he was committed to it. And so as soon as the Seaboard Airline, the railroad, came down from West Palm to Miami, and Opa-Locka was the first stop in Dade County at that time, that was a huge deal, and that's what secured Opa-Locka's future until this day. We have what the Tri-Rail uses today as their track is the original Seaboard line, and we have the original historic train station too. It's not the one that's used for passenger loading, but what was nice is that Tri-Rail even kind of complemented the history of Opa-Locka and its Moorish Arabian style identity by having the new station have those features next to the historic one. Yeah. So anyways, it took him some time from 1920 to 25, 26 to get to an Opa-Locka, but he had already started kind of planting the seeds in other industries. He had a tropical fruit company, a dairy farm, the Florida Dairy Farm. He had a movie studio, a silent film studio in Hialeah. He had 18 companies from housing to all these other peripheral
all based
industries in Florida.
Nice.
So he didn't retire is my point.
Yeah.
He never rested, and in fact, the aviation thing just continued to blossom under him.
Gotcha. And when did he decide to hire architect Bernard Muller to do the Arabian Nights theme? Is that the 26, 27?
That was 25.
25.
He had to have had him already kind of lined up, most likely by summer, because of the news of the Seaboard, and then quickly following with who do we peg to the design, who can actually execute this vision. The original concept for Opa-Locka was to do what's called a Tudor design, or a Robin Hood style, where it's like the English Tudor architecture. Because that's what Mueller was working in for his designs for projects and commissions in New York. But some point, someone at some time had the idea of the Arabian Nights, allegedly and largely influenced by the 1001 Arabian Nights novel. There was also a silent film from 1924 called The Thief of Baghdad with Douglas Fairbanks that had the whole it was wrapped in that world of Persian and Moroccan
Yeah.
influence, and just it was exotic. It was a
Yeah,
departure
absolutely.
for audiences to watch a silent film and be taken elsewhere. We take for granted when we sit in the theater, it's like, oh, that's CGI, that's filmed, or maybe that was practically done. Back then, just to even see a massive set of a castle, a Moorish style palace in front of you, like you couldn't even fathom what it took to build that,
Hmm.
which is in large part why early on Opa-Locka and its marketing strategy was combating or at least addressing what some might suspect was a movie set. Because again, there was filmmaking happening down
Hmm.
here, maybe not as abundant as Hollywood, but people thought that some of the images that they were seeing coming out and being promoted by the Opa-Locka company, Curtis and his team, was in fact a movie set. And
Hmm.
it wasn't. It was an actual livable,
Residential
beautiful
area.
town, country style environment where you could own a piece of land, you could have a modest single family home, and you could focus and really lean into the agricultural industry of the time, which was booming, especially since they referred to the Everglades as being the muck or the black gold because it, yielded so many successful crops. And so a lot of people that were pioneering Opa-Locka early on were actually very interested in agriculture, as was Curtis too.
Nice. Okay, so now, based on my research here, he had Muller designed about what 86 houses before there was a hurricane that happened in 26 that kind of broke down a lot of the project and kind of stopped the whole funding and the whole continuation of this evolution to make Opa-Locka into this Moorish themed residential.
Capital.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So at one point it stopped, and it was due to a hurricane and lack of funds after to basically restart from scratch.
Somewhat. So Mueller, yes, he designed with his two associates out of New York. I think the associates were here on site drafting a lot of the
Hmm.
residential properties. Um, they did something north of 80 to 100 designs, in municipal, commercial, as well as residential structures. And so a lot of people have heard about, especially if you've done a walking tour, if you've heard historians of the area speak about the 20s in particular of Miami, they always reference the Great Hurricane of 1926. But unlike a lot of the coastal communities getting hit pretty hard and almost being annihilated because of that storm, which I think scientists think was a Category 5 back then with no notice, other than like barometers going off the chart and like people not knowing what was happening with the atmosphere. Um, Opa-Locka and some inland communities were actually largely spared by the hurricane. So there is no documentation that any structures were lost. And in fact, as in terms of financing, yes, the hurricane did contribute to the later quick demise of South Florida's appeal and allure nationally, but Curtis had a ton of money. Unlike George Merrick and others that kind of put all their eggs in one basket of farming or agriculture, he had all of his wealth from aeronautics and the U.S. Navy's that relationship. And so he was funding a lot of the project moving forward.
Hmm.
And so interestingly enough, the historic home that I own, as well as many others, were actually built after the hurricane, not
Hmm.
before. There are a few that were, like 20 or so, I imagine, but a handful of them were actually 27 and on.
Okay.
But there's not many. Like if you try to examine what from the era goes back to 1926 until 1929, which is where this design was prevalent, it was at one point 60 total, and now it's like dwindled to 50, and God only knows moving
Hmm.
forward in time we might lose some more. Not my house, because we've taken a lot of care and pride into restoring it exactly how it would have looked in 27. Kind of been freakish about that, turning into like a mini movie set in of itself.
Nice.
But yeah, so that's kind of like, just for clarity, Opa-Locka was in a strong position to keep going. Really, what ended the whole concept and the development's progress was Glenn Curtis dying in 1930 again, the city was founded in 26. He died in 1930. That was the moneymaker. That was the financier for the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so we weren't able to have that capital that, we often dream about or think about, or we see vis-a-vis looking at some of the iconic historic buildings we have today. And even if we don't have an abundance of historic Moorish homes, the few larger structures we have are pretty exceptional. I'm not sure how many communities in South Florida and Florida in general, let alone America, can say they have a historic Egyptian-style temple in the middle of their downtown.
Yeah.
And that was supposed to be the Opa-Locka Bank. Was never completed as a bank, wasn't outfitted or designed inside or out to kind of complete it. But it's clearly, the exterior of that building very much resembles a temple, and it's a National Historic Landmark. Our City Hall building that's being restored right now.
That's the one we met at, right?
Yep. That's well under its way to a complete restoration after years of neglect. City got its stuff together and is moving forward with a launch sometime this year in 2024. But even just the extraordinary nature of the composite design of all these, Far East influences, Persian, as I mentioned, Iranian, kind of one and the same, Moroccan architectural designs. It's extraordinary. So that's kind of where I'm going with where my passion is, from giving free historic walking tours. This year I'm introducing 2 bike tours and actually going over into the Opa-Locka airport side to tell a really complete story about even how that property has affected, for better and worse, Opa-Locka proper. So that'll be really exciting for me. It's a tour I've never done before, let alone on a bike. Would be great to have beer alongside that journey, but needless to say, people are showing up. I did 3 or 4 walking tours last year. They were hits, 20 to 30 people showing up for each, all over the county, region. In fact, some people came from West Palm, right on the Tri-Rail, stop at the station, get off, take my walking tour. But it's helping change the perception of a place that really deserves to be acknowledged for just how unique and extraordinary it is, but also the people there are absolutely fantastic, really wholesome, and just normal. It's like a bedroom community, but it doesn't have this like edge to it that so many other places do. And yeah, we have a long way to go to kind of improving upon, our appearance, our economic base, even just revitalizing our downtown. But it's happening in the form and rooted in historic preservation and heritage. And I'm just proud to own a piece of it, quite literally, property and building, and have created the Opa-Locka Presevation Association, discoveropalocka.org, that encapsulates kind of a one-stop shop of Opa-Locka's history. It's an evolving project. I started at the beginning in the 20s, and I'm working my way decade by decade. But I just want to make this accessible to people, and really get them inspired to really lean into what made this place so special before, originally, and why it's so special today and worth expanding upon. And the Moorish motif, that aesthetic, architecturally super important to uphold, because that's what makes a place different.
Yeah.
When you go to a Doral yard or any public setting, you're always kind of struck by the environment and its design. Opa-Locka should always go back to the source, go back to the source material, and that point of inspiration that they were really vying to be something different and unlike any other place.
That's
Mic drop.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because Opa-Locka throughout the decades, it's funny, like you said on the website, you're starting with the 1920s and you're going to go progress, through the history. But just 40 years ago, Opa-Locka was one of the most dangerous counties or places in America. So how is Opa-Locka now trying to separate itself from that kind of history to become a place where people should come and move and live there and raise families there if it was once a very dangerous place?
Well, there's certainly, it's a misnomer to think you can distance yourself from history. Nobody can. Some people might willfully or blissfully forget history or choose another narrative to buy into. But at the end of the day, this is about accountability and this is about consistency and leadership. That's true for the role of the city manager, having consistency and leadership of a police chief that leads a police force of 35, 40 officers, and a city commission that respectfully honors the position of being a commissioner and really speaking to the needs of the community, but also really trying to balance that with looking ahead, and really trying to advance the city, because you're not helping the community if you're stuck in the past, if you're stuck in your ways, if you've got an antiquated way of politicking. It's not going to move the community forward. We need a balanced economy. We need affordable housing. We need to help offset gentrification for those that are part of the community and want to stay part of that. That those are conversations rooted in generational wealth and equity and all that. But again, you can't distance yourself from that reputation. You have to hit head on, and you have to really make it apparent as to the why of Opa-Locka. I think that's kind of like the basis of where I'm at with a preservation association and walking tours versus where the city's at, and reintroducing themselves with the brand of Opa-Locka to whatever it might be, another municipality, the county, the state. You got to earn respect, especially after years of negligence of kind of running something into the ground. But some communities never see the light of day, and they never come through, and they end up dissolving. And I really don't want that for Opa-Locka, and I really hope that what's part of the fabric of today's leadership will stay and will continue to build upon a level of progress that is only making the place look better. So when you ask, like, why would it be a place for a family to move into? Because here's all the reasons why. We've worked up until this point to deserve a better look at, from anybody, a new home buyer to an investor, even giving our elementary schools a shot, since we have 3 elementary schools in our city limits. So I do believe that it's changing.
Tell me do you know anything about Terrence Pinder?
A former commissioner?
A former commissioner that was tied with embezzling like millions of dollars. Instead of actually putting money to work, he was putting money in his pocket. And
he wasn't the only one, but yeah.
No, he definitely was not.
He just had a tragic end.
Yeah, very interesting. He killed himself by driving his SUV into a tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a way to go, right?
The day, I think I read it was the day before he was to turn himself in to the investigators or something. I mean, look, you clearly he wasn't going to be acquitted and was being charged with something he was very much at fault for doing. But it begs the question, what else could there have been for him to make that decision to take his own life? And it's tragic, but so is his misuse of a respected government position intended to represent the people. And I feel for the people that don't have that they don't believe they have that in their elected officials, and yet there isn't like a slew of candidates to choose from. It tends to be a cycle of the same old timers that want to take a stab back at being said commissioner. I don't know Pinder's political legacy. I don't know if someone preceded him. I know that tends to be a trend in Opa-Locka, with whoever's there now or was recently there had a family member that also kind of served that role. But needless to say, that was a dark time. And it wasn't that long ago. We're talking 2017.
Yeah, because there was a raid in the building in 2016. There was an FBI raid. I have it here at, let's see if I can.
The City Hall.
Yeah, the City Hall. And what did they uncover over there? Is that when they started uncovering all this stuff on Terrence Pinder?
I think it was a swath of people that they were examining, and they needed.
You'd think they get rid of the evidence.
Of course not. They confiscated it, and that's.
So you just chilled at City Hall, because the City Hall that we were at was under repair. So this was before it was in repair.
We have another City Hall building, the newer one. So that's where.
Why did I think
they raided?
It's
Yeah.
crazy that I thought that one was in function the whole time,
No.
and then you guys closed it to the remodel. So the
No.
documentary that I was with you on for that, what is it about the documentary? What did we shoot that day about the building itself? And you were the guest host
Yeah,
for
I
that.
was like billed as the town historian, and then the mayor was there to do his part
Yeah.
in kind of positioning Opa-Locka. But the building was being featured for a show called Mysteries of the Abandoned on Discovery Channel, and they tend to highlight and feature
Thank you.
places. Thank you very much. They tend to hire feature in places that that are quite literally abandoned, that might have this mystique or aura to it.
Yeah.
And we'll see just how dark and dim they get in terms of telling the Opa-Locka story pegged to that building. I'm curious to know how they're going to frame it. But that's why we met for that shoot, and that's supposedly coming out this year at some point. Um, and hopefully it actually looks like an interesting product of what people can expect to see in an Opa-Locka. Um, it's fine to address and answer questions about the political stain, if you will, of the past, but I'm more interested. Well, I am very much interested in accountability of present day or future candidates, but I'm more interested in kind of thinking of ways in which to bring resources and opportunities in the community.
So tell me about yourself and how did you get so passionate about Opa-Locka? What sparked this love for it apart from like getting the house that you're in, which I'm assuming kind of sparked the history to look up the history, and I'm guessing it kind of falls down this kind of rabbit hole where you just started uncovering all this amazing history about Opa-Locka, and it kind of ties into the Opa-Locka Preservation Association and why you wanted to start something like this and why you invest so much time in Opa-Locka.
It goes back to, and what I would encourage anyone to do, which is to tap into your inner child, because that inner child of Alex Van Mecl in Fort Myers, Florida in the 90s and 2000s went back to source material in the form of historic landmarks, Thomas Edison's house, hence why I started giving tours there, then going to school and being fascinated by film, television creation, working in the industry, and then coming back to my home state only to find a city that was inspired, designed, and constructed to be this, Moorish magic,
Damn, can you imagine
magical
what it
set.
looked like back then? Like at its
Oh,
heyday.
I do. That's part of what I love about where my head goes sometimes, and I don't have AI queued up, for there to be output in the form of Adobe Photoshop or something of the sort, but I know what it looked like. That's when I walk around downtown,
You
and
kind of
I can be
transport
very,
yourself back then.
yeah, especially if I give tours. When I did it at Thomas Edison's house, I saw what it looked like in 1929, which is kind of where I framed the story of Edison and the buildings that we would walk into that are still there today. With Opa-Locka, it's the exact same thing. It's just I have an entire city to play with. This is my playground. This is my stage to kind of set the tone and take the transport for myself as well as the guests that I'm with back to 1926. And I want to be clear, that story is not inclusive of all people. This was a white town. This was a white development. There's this term sundown town of like some white communities, white-led established communities, kind of basically either legislatively or just understandingly kind of kicking out black people after a certain time. I don't know if Opa-Locka went to that extent, but it certainly had elements of that. And black people could only live on the east side of town, which is where a lot of the crime and corruption happened in the 90s with, drug trafficking and such. But, as important as it is to revel in and imagine this beautiful landscape, this barren landscape with these dotted massive structures, massive for the time. Now we have like Brickell, and that's massive. But back then, to see a 3-story mosque-like palace spring up in the form of what later became a city hall municipal building, it was extraordinary. And all around you, all you saw was sand, some paved, you know, roadways, and a lot of pine trees. Um, but you know, you also want to take it a step further and look at the demographics when you take that transport, so you have a full understanding and context of what that would have looked like for a group of people that couldn't enjoy the allure and the beauty the way that somebody with money and of a certain color could.
Right.
And I'm not suggesting all of Opa-Locka was racist, but this was the Jim Crow era. This is when, you know, the line was clearly drawn as to where black people fell alongside whites. And then there was like Hispanic, but a very small percentage. The original, or one of the original directories that accounted for populations back then was called the Polk Directory. And a special one was done in 1927 in Opa-Locka, and I think there was like 251 residents registered. And of that number, there were like 25 black families, and then it specified like 5 Cuban families or something like that. I'd love to know more about who they were and where they came from. I don't have that just yet, but that's part of what I'm in pursuit of, and very interested in. I don't just talk about the architecture. It's fascinating.
Which is fascinating.
It is the anchor.
Yeah.
It is the draw even today.
Yeah, because it's a visual medium that people can be like, wow.
Right.
You know, so it automatically draws you
visceral.
in. Yeah.
Yeah, because you don't see these buildings anywhere else in the country,
Yeah.
as limited
and it's so
as they
random.
are.
You know, like to be like, yeah, I want this whole town to look like Arabian Nights themed. Like you said, it must have felt like a movie set back then. Because thinking about the type of people that would have went back then to these types of events, because they did host events when they were there. So can you imagine all the celebrities, all the political politicians that would go there, the higher ups, and it's just like became this wealth community. And then the hurricane puts a stop on that. It's pretty
in part
crazy.
But you know, true for any art form, some things go out of style, right? For example, we talked today about being woke or you know, not being appropriate or in keeping with what is accepted in 2024.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of misogynistic and sexist comments made in Miss Congeniality with Sandra Bullock. It's one of my favorite movies.
I love that movie.
But I revisited it recently, and there's a lot of one-liners that are in today's world. If that was in a movie, it wouldn't fly.
Yeah.
Same is true for the idea of something so distinct, in my opinion, and that's why Opa-Locka lost a lot of its special features like domes on homes or minarets. A lot, in addition to just maximizing real estate in the form of livable areas, you know, people would cover their really charmed porch rooms with like pointed arches in the front, blocked it off with like a square window, and takes away all the character. Things go out of style, times change, and I think that Opa-Locka suffered from really not really fully embracing the Arabian Nights identity. But I think it is, I believe personally, it's where we can always go back to and really kind of draw inspiration from, and that's why it's so important to focus in new construction having it. I mean, 3 or 4 of our gas stations have domes on them. It's not because the developer wanted domes on a standard gas station. It's because they were informed about this place and how, and they felt that they could contribute something to that identity.
Fantastic.
And people don't appreciate that the way that I would like them to. But that's something that I'm working on to try to get the city to help fund, which is bring back domes on historic homes, because then it's complementary, not just to what it originally was, but it'll help to establish the identity back over again. That's long been forgotten or underappreciated.
Yeah. Okay, let's go back to the naval base. Curtis built that naval base, right?
He campaigned for them to set up next to Opa-Locka.
Right.
And that
so
was
it's like his own private like airstrip.
It was his own. He owned it, and it was an air base, and then I think he gave it to the city at some point. But it was all for the purpose and benefit of Opa-Locka.
And then the airport itself was used very heavily during World War II. And the U.S. military had a big presence in Opa-Locka, and that also
all
changed,
over South Florida.
Yeah, and that also changed the face of Opa-Locka for a couple decades, because it was like this militarized zone.
Right.
You mentioned you're gonna start doing tours on this naval base and stuff. Is there anything interesting you can tell me that you would be sharing with some of your tour guides?
Yeah. Well, I will show people what I believe to be the original land that Curtis would have stepped on to be able to appreciate Opa-Locka's untouched beauty before it was built as an airport or a city. So we'll talk about that in the location where I believe that happened. We'll see from a distance a hangar that still stands from, I believe it's 1942, that was built. It's the last one that remains, from my understanding, on that property connected to the Navy. The Marines also were there in the 50s for a brief-ish period. Today, the Coast Guard is there, the Miami Coast Guard. And even what today's Opa-Locka Executive Airport looks like, with all these private luxury terminals, the Concourse Racing Club, and ironically how that connects to Curtis's racing fascination. And then to make our way back over to Opa-Locka to see kind of like the progression of going from aeronautics to development in the form of the Moorish revival design. So that's kind of what I plan on carving out. There's also more just in terms of like the blimps that used to be there, the Goodyear blimps, the German Graf Zeppelin. That's also the blimp hangar that was destroyed in Bad Boys for the film. So there's a little film history there.
I see which scene you're talking about. You're talking about towards the end of Bad Boys 1 when they're racing down the strip with the Porsche.
Something
and he
like
tells
that.
Martin Lloyd, from now on, that's how you drive.
Yeah.
That's how you drive.
Could have been. I watched it so many years ago, and I remember
I
an
love that
explosion,
movie,
but
bro.
Michael Bay is all about explosions and
Oh, it's called Bayham for a reason.
Yeah.
Like, he has his
I
own
love
significant style. And I actually, like, I listen to a lot of reviews and read a lot of reviews of film because I'm a big film buff, and I love that. And I love working in the business as well because, like you, I love the camaraderie that comes with working on sets. Like the agenda to have an ultimate goal, and everybody's working towards that ultimate goal, which is completing the movie and doing all these things.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fantastic. And these directors that have their own significant style and look, it's great because it shows that a person has mastered their craft. Like, they have a significant look that everybody would recognize.
right.
Like, you don't need to know who's directing it, but the style already tells you, like, I've seen a style of movie like this before. And everybody that's seen Bayham movies, Michael Bay's movies, know that he has a significant style. That's why Transformers and all these, they all look like they live in one universe, like it was all shot by the same guy, which technically it was.
Right.
But yeah, it's fantastic. I love that part about the film industry. I love how directors have their own way of expressing their own artistic, touch on movies and by using their own styles. It's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing with composers, with music composers.
I think
for
it's
film.
even more obvious, like a tone or style with
Mhm.
composition for sure.
Yeah. Like anybody
Um,
that listens to film scores. Well, I'm a big film score guy, so I collect a lot of film score vinyls. That's my thing. That's kind of like my hobby, is to collect vinyls.
Nice.
A lot of it is film scores. And I was having this conversation the other day with one of my guests on my podcast, and we were talking about how important film scores is in a movie and how it can make and break a movie sometimes. You could have a bad movie with a great soundtrack
Right.
and a great movie with a shitty soundtrack. It's just the level of like importance music it's fantastic. And yeah.
I love that you said that because I went to the Astoria Film Museum
Mm-hmm.
in New York, and they have a interactive kiosk that plays clips from movies, and then you choose different scores for that movie. One of them is what was used in the film, and the other two or three are something completely different. And the point of that portion of the exhibit was to stress the value that scores have in evoking emotion and capturing a moment and setting a tempo or a feeling for something, leading up to another reaction to whatever will come.
Yeah.
And I remember clicking on a clip from the movie Twister, which is one of my favorite
I love that
films,
movie.
and
I
I
rewatched
love
it
the
the other day.
soundtrack. It's so
Yeah.
great. Love the soundtrack, and I remember listening to the other ones and being like, "No, this doesn't work," because the song is literally called Wheatfield. It's the beginning of the movie, and it's a helicopter, like kind of pan shot going over the wheat field, tracking the red truck from the movie. And that's the beginning of the movie. That's like, it's setting a positive, upbeat, vivacious tempo, and it's unmistakably Twister. But then the other scores are like, what? This doesn't make any sense. Like, this doesn't fit the sweepingness of the camera
Yeah.
movement. And so I thought it was really cool that they did that, and I love that they really deconstructed, filmmaking in that
Yeah.
in that way.
It's interesting the back stage of filmmaking with producers and how much power they can have on film sets. That's why
Right.
directors' cuts exist in movies. For those that don't know, if a director is hired for a movie, they have a vision that they want to see come on the big screen. They find a producer, the producer helps fund it and all these things, right? But a lot of times the person with the money dictates kind of what happens
Some
on
parts
set.
of the
Sometimes,
output.
yeah. Sometimes they're like, okay, I'll fund this project, but I want this actor to play this role, or I want that actress to play that role, or I want to twist and tweak the script, or I want to bring in my own script supervisor to change it, make it more this.
Right.
And then the director is always in this conflicting like argument sometimes based on his artistic creativity on the project that he's been hired for, by the way, because it's his movie,
Right.
ends up being butchered on the back end. And a lot of times movies that had like great soundtracks were scrapped because the studio wanted to bring in a different soundtrack to emulate a successful movie that came out that same period. And it's just a mismatch, and it's a big problem that we have today in Hollywood, and why there's so many strikes, and why it's important for these strikes to happen, like the one that happened I think last year, the writer's
Yeah.
strike. Like if these strikes don't happen, then the production companies are always going to walk all over the artistic integrity of directors or filmmakers, because they see business, they don't see art. They're like, how am I going to market this movie to make money? If I'm going to invest $100 million into your project, right, and your whole project is like a lecture, the only person that can pull that off today is Christopher Nolan with Oppenheimer. Like, he literally put a history class in a 3.5 hour movie, and people
Yeah.
loved it. 13 Oscar nominations for that movie, 11 Oscar nominations for Poor Things, which I didn't get to see, by the way. I don't know. Did you get to see that movie?
I have
The one.
been so out of. I haven't seen a movie since Barbie.
Since what? Barbie? I didn't
Yeah.
see Barbie in theaters.
Shame on you.
Did you like it?
It's excellent.
You like that?
I just love that something so colorful and superficial had so much heart and meaning to it. And yet it's very commercial, but it's also auteur. It's also very artistic
Yeah.
and clever and pulled inspiration from other.
Greta Gerwig is a fantastic director.
She
Yeah,
is.
she's fantastic.
Fantastic movie. The thing that I'm fearful of is sequels, because once
you
one's great,
Yeah.
like, God forbid they ever make an E.T. sequel or remake E.T. Like, you don't remake some
Yeah,
movies.
I
'cause
agree. Just like Back to the Future.
It's like lightning striking in the same location twice,
Yeah.
one after another. Like, you just can't replicate some of the moments that are captured on screen, let alone edited. You talk about director's cut.
Mhm.
They have parameters, and at that time, talking about things going out of style, maybe that scene didn't work, but then a director's cut comes out and implants a scene that they've sat on for as much time as they may have, and
Yeah.
then they realize, hey, this actually does work, and this will make up an extended director's cut that
Mhm.
people, the fans especially, would love to have. Like,
Yeah.
I would love there to be a director's cut of Jurassic Park, like the original one, because I know the would.
So good.
I
bro.
know the movie, step by step, beat by beat, but imagine another 15 minutes of it that you've never seen before,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
yet
some
it's a
deleted scenes and
masterpiece.
stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, that's what's great about digital content. Not physical content, like
Right.
physical media, like
Right.
buying DVDs, buying Blu-rays. It's like, well, why would I buy a Blu-ray today and like start a whole collection and buying these Criterion collections or Arrow Universe collections or whichever one of these publication companies that are now printing these physical medias is for the extra content. I mean, sure, you could go on YouTube and probably look them up, but
Yeah.
when you're watching a movie, right? At least for me, sometimes the movie automatically wants like invokes me to go into the making of that particular movie. Like, how did they
Right.
shoot it? Where did they shoot it? How did they get the
Or a
actors
TV
involved?
show.
Or TV show,
Like
you know?
Griselda, like I didn't know much about her. I didn't know anything about her.
The
to
cocaine
be
grandmother?
of course.
Bro, she's wild.
Yeah, didn't know
She's
anything
wild.
about it. Didn't grow up in Miami, so why would I have had any awareness of her? And I don't deal, so I certainly don't know who she is or the product.
Yeah.
But the series begged the question of, and I went on a downward spiral of like trying to figure out who she was, what was authentic and accurate to that era, the locations,
Hmm.
her personality, Sophia's depiction of her.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, what do you think of her casting as that role?
I mean, she's definitely far more beautiful.
Yeah.
She's a model. Griselda candidly wasn't.
No, she
So
definitely was not.
that part, I was just appreciating how she interpreted and really evoked who
Mhm.
this person was, and some might falter for this or the production for that matter, but humanized her too as a mother, a caring one at that,
Mhm.
despite all the other
Well, that was a
awful
big thing
things.
with The Godfather, and at the time when The Godfather was being made and thinking it was going to be like another mob movie like from the 40s and 50s, and it was not. It was a movie about family,
Yeah,
and it was a completely different way of looking at what these people represent. And they're not
sure.
just killers or these things. They're family people. They have moralities. They have love, and
Well,
they
that's a
party. And
stretch. Moralities.
I mean, bro, come on. The Godfather dropped some logic. I love that movie.
It did,
Yeah.
it did, but
I mean, especially when you look at how, when I mean like by the morality, I'm talking about like how it's kind of related to me personally in the sense how like my grandparents taught me like ethics and like dinner table ethics, how to treat a woman, how to open the door for people, all these things. And I'm not comparing that stuff to The Godfather, but The Godfather plays that kind of portrait of the father and the son when
Yeah.
they have all these moral values. Like he doesn't want to sell drugs. He's strictly out of drugs. He's only going to do like gambling and stuff like that. Drugs are too dirty. So he
Yeah.
has these standards that kind of separate him from all the other people. Not to say he's not a criminal. He's still a criminal. They're still bad people.
Right.
But the way they portrayed him as a family man and how he was this like he always loved his wife and his family comes first, and the way he raises kids, it has a certain pride in loving family and being close to family, and family is ultimately the most important thing. At the end of the day, blood is thicker than water, so it paints this picture of I think a great family dynamic, even though most of them die throughout the series, but it's just the way that they're portrayed, how Francis Ford Coppola and Mario Puzo wanted to portray gangsters. They're not
Yeah.
just like these gun-trotting guys that are going around, selling drugs, robbing banks. Their typical mobster stuff. It's more than that. They're family men. They're married men. They're fathers. They're uncles.
Right.
They're all these things, and it's a great movie. There's a great show called The Offer on Paramount that kind of depicts the making of The Godfather. And
Oh, I heard about this.
man, that show is amazing, amazing. And I didn't know this, but Frank Sinatra, he hated that. He hated Mario Puzo because he thinks that Johnny Fontaine's character is based off him, and they didn't like each other. They almost fought in a restaurant one time, and it was wild. Like I've never seen like Frank Sinatra in that light before. Like
Right.
from his documentaries that I've seen, Frank Sinatra always looked like he was this glamorous icon, but in this show, he's a mean motherfucker, and he doesn't like that guy, and he really wanted to like hurt him and wanted to fight him and all these things because he didn't like how he represented his image in the movie.
Sure.
And never seen Frank like that before, so it's kind of weird. It's like that sweet voice can also be that mean-looking guy when he
Oh,
wants
Frankie.
to be. Old Blue Eyes over
Oh,
there.
blue eyes.
Yeah, the great documentary on him on HBO, I think, came out. It's like 4 hours long. It's fantastic. It's called Sinatra.
Nice.
Like that whole era, like that whole fascination with the 40s, 50s, these artists. I love that time. Like film noir is like my favorite type of movies.
Yeah.
Casablanca, Maltese Falcon, the detectives. That's for me. That's
Bygone.
cinema. That's
It's
that's
bygone.
movies. Yeah. Today it's more spectacle.
Right.
Back then it's more it's more substance over style. Today, it's style over substance.
Right, and plus they had um, pretty influential and very thought out marketing and PR campaigns
Yeah.
attached to all of it. Even if it was just a matter of like who was dating who, like that was all manufactured for the benefit of the public to take and run with. Today we don't celebrity doesn't have the same impact, I think, especially since
Yeah. There are
you
no
know
movie stars today.
yeah, and that's like when I saw like a Meryl Streep, going back to that question, I I saw her, and then Jane Fonda came in not long after that, and I just look at these women and I'm like, these are the last of movie stars.
Exactly.
When I spent the day with Nicole Kidman, even if she's younger, I was like, even she is one of the last of the movie stars.
Hmm.
So, it's
Yeah,
just
Tom
how
Cruise,
him
Will
too.
Smith, Brad Pitt. These guys were movie stars. These guys. If Brad Pitt, Denzel Washington, these people's names were tied to a movie poster, you're watching that movie for Denzel Washington.
Right.
Today, if it's not an intellectual IP, no one's watching a movie. That's why you have
Right.
Barbie. That's why you have the Marvel universe. People are not going to movies to watch the actress or the actor perform and do his magic. They're there to see a character. They're there to see Iron
Yeah.
Man. They're there to see Superman. They're there to see Barbie. You know, the movie star is not what it was in the '90s, man. Like I miss that era, really do.
Yeah.
I think the best of film
There was
was
definitely
in
more heart too in the
that. Yeah.
90s too.
And there's no what is the low budget, the medium budget movies? There's no more medium budget movies. It's either you got a low budget movie like 50 mil or less, or it's a $250 million epic.
Yeah.
Like back in the day, the '90s, like a lot of Jim Carrey's movies, Jane Fonda's movies, the movie Helen Hunt, Twister. These movies are under $80 million. There's this medium of movies, medium budget movies that were super successful in the '90s, but today they don't fly. They don't. They become TV shows.
Right.
So like movies like Unfaithful with Richard Gere and Diane Lane, I think her name is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a movie about infidelity. But movies like that, like people are not gonna watch that movie today. If that movie came out today, like it's
Well, it's also
crazy.
viewing habits too. Like
Yeah.
I'm struggling to get myself to go to the theater because it's so fucking expensive.
Bro, I got a solution for you.
I don't rip shit.
No, I got you, bro. So Regal, this is
Oh,
something
this
I
movie
recently.
pass thing.
Yeah, it's fantastic, bro.
Okay.
It's
I might-
$23 a
I was
month.
an early subscriber to Movie Pass, and then it folded, and now it's back. Then I did it
Bro,
for AMC, but
I'm telling
I
you.
got to do something because I've not, again, other than Barbie and spending a pretty penny, dinner was included. I don't go to the movies.
Dinner better be included.
I know,
if you're
but
taking me to the movies 2
that's
hours.
that's the only competitive business model against streaming, and that's
Yeah.
why everything gets repurposed into a 6-part, 8-part, 10-part.
Yeah.
And it's even becoming less than 10, like a Game of Thrones, because you can accomplish the same but still get them locked in, the viewer, for any period of time. But then there's the difference between an air schedule versus drop. The difference between how an HBO releases something versus Netflix. And I've always adhered to HBO because I like the anticipation. I like waiting for the next. But a Netflix would argue probably, or Hulu, I think they kind of adopt a similar model to HBO, but kind of find an in-between those two. That if we don't lock them in here and now and have them binge it through,
Yeah.
then we're going to lose them because something else has already got their attention. But if the quality is there, people will come back on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, they
and
will.
It'll build the hype.
Mhm.
God, I mean, when is going to be the next Game of Thrones, if ever?
I
Creating
mean,
the Sunday night.
They tried with the House of Dragons and that didn't work.
I mean, it's working to an extent, but it's,
I also feel
anything
like
needs to build.
there's a fatigue thing too, because they overmilked certain things. Like look what Disney does. Like Disney has acquired most of the production companies out there now. It owns all of it, almost every IP out there.
Yeah.
It's
Except for
shouldn't-
Florida.
Shouldn't be allowed, honestly. Yeah. and if anything Disney's good at, it's milking its properties, like to
Right.
the point where people get tired of it.
Well, it's gonna kick back on them because especially just even going and experiencing their worlds at theme parks, it's becoming a privilege, and like it was never intended to be that for
Yeah.
the average income.
It's so expensive now, bro. Just to go for the day, I think it's like $100 or so. So imagine you have a
Yeah.
family of 5 people.
Yeah.
You know.
Now
like,
I want to sign up for the Regal or whatever pass.
So yeah,
I
tell you a
need
little
it.
bit about that. It's $23 a month, and it's
Are you
unlimited.
being paid to say this?
No, I'm not. I just love the service because I love to go to the movies. Like, for me, I much prefer to pay the $23 a month for the movie theater subscription than to pay Netflix, which I don't have. You know, I could have streaming services at home. But when I have the Rego thing, it entices me to go to movies, even for movies that I would normally like just watch at home, right? So you just
Right.
watch in the movies because it's free. You pay $23 and you can go every day if you want. It doesn't really matter. You know, it's free. Well, not free. You pay the monthly subscription, but you can go as many times. Is what I'm saying. So even those like movies, like for example, you know how you do this endless scrolling on Netflix, you can never find something to watch, so you end up just picking anything and you kind of just watch it.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Dude,
I'm just kidding.
everybody does this.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times, how many hours I've probably wasted scrolling just through, like, what am I going to watch?
Because you want to make sure that what you commit to is worth your time
Exactly.
until the
but
time
this is what I like
passes
about the
and
movies. Once you buy that ticket, you're locked in. You're locked in that chair.
with those
I mean, you could get up and leave.
open-mouthed popcorn eaters and everything in between.
That's kind of annoying, though. I'm not going to lie. It's a big pet peeve of mine. It's like they want to eat when the movie's happening.
God, people
And it's
suck
just like
sometimes.
loud,
Sorry if
crunchy.
you're one of those people, but you need to stop. It is
Yeah.
unfortunate.
Eat
It's
the nachos during the
inappropriate.
trailers, guys. Like, I don't want to hear the mouths.
I don't understand why there can't be healthier, less obnoxious food options for people to buy than nachos.
You want a poke
and
bowl
pop-
while you're eating?
Like,
while you're watching a movie?
yes, they actually yes, or burger. Like it doesn't have to be the loudest food group
Yeah.
out there. It's like chewing celery.
Yeah.
At least celery would be healthy. There's nothing healthy.
Imagine a whole group of people in the theater just crunching on
Yes,
celery.
actually I could, and I would love that. Or fruit, like, but Jesus Christ, like they've really sold and inextricably connected popcorn and nachos to the movie experience,
Yeah.
and it ruins the movie experience.
You know they sprayed the popcorn scent in their AC to make you like the whole thing smells like
That doesn't
popcorn.
surprise me. I also know that the butter that they put on popcorn isn't really butter.
Oh, definitely not butter.
So,
And they put something in their drink to make you urinate.
that would be
faster.
that would be a whole
For
nother
sure.
podcast just to talk about the ills of corporate society in regards to your own personal health and the choices you don't really realize you're making just by buying a simple luxury like popcorn or
Yeah.
soda. But at this point, we should know all the wiser that those things are not good for our health.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be a surprise that we have colorectal cancer when we're putting shit into our bodies.
Bro, the diet of Americans is really bad compared to like some other parts of the country. Like the amount of cancer
Yeah.
rate we have here just in the U.S. and
That's
how
a
much people
whole
have
nother
diabetes.
talk. That's a whole
how
nother
much-
talk.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation with somebody.
I got enough on my plate with
Yeah.
Opa-Locka, my own life.
I don't know
so
enough about that stuff too to even talk about it. I'll just butcher people's names and paraphrase a bunch of stuff. But yeah,
Yep.
it's crazy. So tell me, what's next for you besides the naval tours? Like, what are you doing now? Are you still working with Opa-Locka or in any way,
I'm
or is it
working
just
at
like
an
volunteering?
organization in Opa-Locka and doing the walking tours. So
That's your
next
full-time
one-
gig.
What?
That's your
What?
full-time gig. What you're doing now?
Not the walking tours.
No, the working with Opa-Locka.
Yeah. Not the city, but another organization. And I just published on Discover Opa-Locka on Instagram and Facebook, as well as the website, discoveropalocka.org. All the tours for 2024, all the walking tours, as well as the bike tours. So now people can sign up. It's free.
Mm-hmm.
And
How long are those tours, roughly?
about 2 hours.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a cafecito break in between that?
That would be great.
No, you
If
should.
you know a
'cause
sponsor,
I'll
like Don Francisco's would be great.
maybe I'll just come and I'll have like a backpack that kind of has this whole espresso thing
That'd be
happening,
great.
and I just kind of serve
That'd be
people.
great. Or beer, one of the two.
I'd be here. I mean, I was gonna say beer dehydrates you, but so does coffee, so I can't say that.
But you have beer after doing like a marathon, so why not do it after a tour?
That's
I don't know.
probably
I need to figure something
super
like that
rewarding.
out.
Oh, Alex, man, I really appreciate you.
No,
coming
thank
out,
you
man.
for having me.
was
Thank you for your
fantastic.
time.
No,
your
thank you for your
attention.
time.
Well,
Actually,
what can
Right.
I say? I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to get the word out, and I'm most happy, to welcome people to discover and learn about a place that, really deserves that level of
Yeah.
care and attention, and it just happens to be my home.
And honestly, the history behind it alone is interesting enough to get people interested.
Yeah,
Anything
come on
that
out.
has that kind of history is fantastic.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to develop a documentary on it to have to
Speaking
have
my
some kind of
language.
stuff. Yeah. You know what? We'll talk after the show.
Sounds great to me.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Till next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in to the Oliver Stone Podcast, Safe Journeys Across the Stars.